So I've been thinking a lot about Guild Wars 3 and where we're going and all of that stuff, and where Guild Wars 2 is going, and kind of what Guild Wars lacks versus what they can make up for in Guild Wars 3 that would make it a better game. And I think a lot of the creators out there and a lot of the discussion that I've heard is more focused on the MMO side of the MMORPG. And I personally feel that one of the best areas that they can improve, especially with these smaller scale party sizes, is the RPG side, the role-playing game side of the house. Now, Guild Wars 2 is an MMORPG. It has a story associated with it. It has some gameplay elements, and I think that in recent years, the actual storytelling of the game has kind of been lacking. Now, in the core game of Guild Wars 2, it is very much kind of like a checklist thing where you follow your hero's journey up until you become the commander. But it is very much like, okay, go do this and then go do that and then go do this and then go do that. And frankly, the and then style of storytelling is not really my favorite. It tends to be kind of boring, and it doesn't really feel like your protagonist is actually doing something. Like, you do stuff, but it doesn't really matter if you do something. I think that we need to shift the causation in Guild Wars 3 to be much more like reaction based, like a chain reaction of events. Now, there are elements of that in Guild Wars 2 and some of the better stories. That's where you get these like chain reaction style of storytelling. And in the narrative, they refer to this as like therefore storytelling. So you have your protagonist do something that has an unintended consequence or some kind of side effect. Therefore, this other thing happens that the protagonist now needs to deal with. And stories that tell their story in this way tend to be very, very engaging, because it seems like just a crazy string of events that ends up happening. And it's fairly easy to develop storylines following that, especially in a smaller scale. I think that one of the problems that Guild Wars 2 did have is the Dragon Ball Z problem, where now when you have power scaling, it's planetary universal threats, and you have literal gods in the realm, you know. And I think that the Dragon Saga very much limited itself by basically having this like world-ending threat after world-ending threat after world-ending threat, and then trying to develop an engaging story internal to that. It makes it really hard to tell a story following a story like that. So let's say you have the pack commander, right? And you just defeated Mordremoth, giant jungle dragon. After your whole pact was destroyed, all the fleet was destroyed, and you overcome this challenge. How are you going to tell a localized small scale story using the same individuals that have been known to complete that? You know, it's like pairing up, you know, John Wick versus a gang of like street thugs. And I feel like that's where we're at right now with this current expansion model. If you take a look at Secrets of the Obscure, for instance, they were trying to tell a smaller scale story, and then it kind of evolved, and then the big twist ending at the end kind of ruined the whole thing. Without going into spoilers, I think anybody that's actually played that expansion kind of knows what I'm talking about. You know, we are going into the wizards, you have these demons and stuff like that. And it was meant to be like not a dragon thing, like, oh, it's not doing the world, but these demons are like invading people's minds. And then it goes sideways in the latter half. In Janthier Wilds, it's like, oh, there are titans invading this region, and then bada bing bada boom, you go in, you seal the gate for the titans, you get some history and lore about the Mersat, which in my opinion wasn't told in the best way. That is the main complaint that I have with these new expansions, is you have a story that you're telling through 8 million pieces of paper that are scattered across the map. I don't know who is doing these journals and is throwing them literally into a tornado and having them go all across the map, and you collect, you know, sheet numbered 1, sheet number 2, sheet number number 3 to figure out what's going on with the story. I'm not a fan of that. And then now we have Visions of Eternity, which once again, we're falling in the same trap, which is this magical seer artifact, and it's in the hands of the bad guy, and he wants to rewrite the universe and big old existential threat. And meanwhile, like, yeah, it is smaller scale. It's just pretty much the pack commander and his gang of misfits kind of like fighting these people. But we've succeeded so many times at this point that it doesn't feel impactful. It feels like there's a predetermined outcome almost. And I feel in Guild Wars 3, we have the opportunity to scale things down quite a bit. I feel like that there should be a lot of political drama between the gods. There should be factions in that the player character can choose to align with, and so that way that will help determine kind of these little story branches you go down. I think that a lot of RPGs and action RPGs do a good job of telling good stories with that reaction type of storytelling. You know, it's the Indiana Jones thing where he picks up the crystal skull and then all of a sudden all the traps start going off and he has to escape and so on and so forth. I think that type of storytelling is what Guild Wars 2 is really lacking right now, to the point that outside of just a little quest thing, the little quest pop-up, you don't ever really know what you're gonna do. It's just like you say, I need to get into this temple, and somebody says, oh, well, to get into this temple you need to go pass a trial, and then you go and do the trial, and then you get access to the temple, and then, you know, it's very boring. It doesn't feel urgent. It just feels like this is something that the commander wants to do to progress something. It doesn't feel like it's something he has to do or a situation that he gets put in and then has to resolve. Another aspect that I think is actually like really detrimental is there's a concept of a story circle, and there's a lot of geometric story frameworks as you get into world building and storytelling, but it was popularized by Dan Harmon. He like simplified the traditional one, and ultimately, to summarize, your character needs to basically go on an adventure into the unknown and then sacrifice something and then return to the normal, having lost something or having changed. And time after time again, in the most recent stories that we've been hearing from the Guild Wars 2 franchise, I feel like there hasn't been sacrifice and there hasn't been change. The only real sacrifice that ends up happening is the death of a character that we met 5 seconds ago, which doesn't really count. And the only real change is that whatever problem that sprouted up is now gone. So ultimately the world ends up as a right back to square one, net equal, you know, no changes happened, nothing happened, and it doesn't really feel like the actions of the commander are impactful. Now, hopefully in Guild Wars 3, with the clean slate and the very open end that we have with the 1,000-year prequel, we have a lot of room to have these stories be told. We know that during this period, Abaddon eventually will, you know, give magic to man, or maybe he had just given it to man, and it is during the period of strife amongst the gods where they just exiled Doom and now they're getting ready to exile Abaddon. Only time will tell, right? But I think that setting up the narrative and setting up the world and then setting up gameplay mechanics to make sense inside of that world is a very, very critical part of making a game function. If you look at games like Expedition 33, if you haven't played Expedition 33, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but the world that they live in, even the currencies that you use and these traits that you use, being pictos and chroma and things like that, they make sense in the concept of the world that they have built. Like like the world building aspect, it makes sense why you're using those currencies, why people are talking the way that they are talking, and ultimately it all jives. Like, it all makes sense. When you have those inconsistencies, that's when it kind of breaks that immersion out and you just realize, like, what am I even doing? So I feel hopeful that the ArenaNet team can tell a good and engaging story, especially if what they said is true and they looked at a lot of ARPGs and action RPGs. Action RPGs are single player games for the most part, or limited multiplayer games, and we have had some really good ones, especially if you start getting into the Souls-like category. I think everybody knows I'm a big fan of Lies of P. It is a great story. It's a great world. I have been playing Stellar Blade. That one is a little bit less good in terms of actual story and world building. Like, the world that they built is pretty nice. It's just that you don't engage with it that much throughout the game. But even roguelikes and games like Hades and Hades 2, the story and the gameplay mechanics all mesh and are cohesive. And I'm really hoping that the ArenaNet team and the Guild Wars 3 team have taken the time to consider their naming conventions, consider the way their traits interact, why their traits interact this way, why their classes are this way, and how they actually fit in the world that they've built. Because I feel that the Guild Wars lore is actually really good, and reading the Guild Wars books, which eventually they're going to go live once I finish reading Ghost of Ascalon. I'm going to start releasing it live, and then I'm going to work on Edge of Destiny. But reading the books and reading a lot of the lore and reading the synopses of these stories is far more engaging and interesting than the actual gameplay that you get to see in game. And that's kind of the downside of Guild Wars 2 and kind of where it fell short. I feel like the storytelling and reaction storytelling in terms of actual gameplay, it's better highlighted in Guild Wars 1 than it is in Guild Wars 2, and that's kind of a shame. But hopefully we end up going back to that in Guild Wars 3, to where you feel this urgency to get things done, and you feel like the world is interacting with your player character, and your player character is in return making actual changes. Because an MMO is nice, but you want to have a strong RPG elements with it as well. So with that, I just wanted to rant for a minute. That's kind of where I've been sticking. I've been playing Guild Wars 2 a little bit, but mostly I've been playing through Hades 1, and I'm about to play through Hades 2 next. And I've been really fixated in and engrossed in the story that they told. And I really hope that the narrative team and the game team, the people that actually build the game around the story, have taken the time and sat down with each other, so that way everything makes sense. Because even something as simple as naming certain things certain ways can really tie everything together. So with that, if you watched till here, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. It's 4th of July. I'm actually cooking some ribs right now, so shout out America. But beyond that, thanks for watching. Big thanks to all of my subscribers, and a special thanks to all of my members who support the channel. Just a disclaimer, I am an ArenaNet partner. You can support me with my referral link if you want. Anyway, thanks again, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.